This is the Tree of Life, Season 19, Chapter 9. In this episode, we will be talking about how substitution events reflect particular arrangements of impulses, or objects of consciousness. Since we saw that in sequential substitution events, the acquiescence is common as between the initial substitution event and the subsequent reverse substitution event. And we saw that stacking order is determined such that the outgoing consciousness has acquiesced but not expressed the given impulse, whereas the incoming consciousness has already acquiesced and expressed it, and incorporated it into their self-representation. We can see that in groups, the movement of consciousness flows away from the point of execution. In any group-related activity, this means that the leader of the group becomes the incoming consciousness in the second of the group, and so on and so forth. In tasks such as driving down a road, there is a constant flow of consciousnesses away from the destination point along the path of travel. Now, hierarchical natural law produces stacking, whereby the higher-ranked individual within the hierarchy is the outgoing consciousness, returning when the task is completed by the incoming consciousness, who is lower in the tier. In hierarchical natural law, there are usually common objects of consciousness, as between the incoming consciousness and the outgoing consciousness, which are limited to those relevant to the task which relates to the impulse which is acquiesced to. These objects can be fixed, that is, either physical or digital objects, or they can be unfixed. If they are unfixed, they may be relations between impulses within structures, such as a substitutionary relationship between given impulses, or merely a state of negation with respect to specific impulses. Thus, it can be said that hierarchies need not be formally established in the context of some institutional structure, but rather may be assumed by virtue of a given set of inhibitions, or relations between substitutionary impulses. The common unfixed objects thus are the relationships between the impulses, or selection of given impulses for negation. Since hierarchical natural law does not require in-group formation through emotional coupling, which often results in incorporation of the acquiesced impulse into the self-representation of the outgoing consciousness and recurrence, but rather seems to rely upon preferential expectation matching by some central person of a given structure, hierarchical natural law produces in-groups and out-groups, whilst also aligning those within the tiers toward cooperative endeavors towards a given task. Since we saw that stacking produces a kind of dissociation in the objects of consciousness of the incoming and outgoing consciousness, it is clear that that dissociation does not extend to common objects of consciousness. Since these common objects represent a nexus point of the awareness, and the unity between the incoming and outgoing consciousness, the reverse substitution event radiates out from these objects, producing greater bifurcation through the movements of the plates framed by these objects. In other words, within hierarchical natural law, an impulse relates to certain objects, around which both incoming and outgoing consciousnesses' movements are framed. The reverse substitution event in this case is anchored to these objects. Whereas in tautological natural law, it is merely anchored to expression of the impulse, which is not necessarily spatially restricted. Thus, we can say that hierarchical natural law produces common relations to objects, fixed, or impulses, being negation, or affirmation, of a set of impulses, or an arrangement of substitutionary impulses. Both can produce mirroring and cooperation. But while tautological natural law generally produces in groups through emotional coupling, hierarchical natural law naturally produces preferential expectation matching and proprietary experience channels. In past episodes, we spoke about lateral alters as if they might be linked to family lines. But these lateral alters might actually be produced by the existence of a natural hierarchy centered around certain family structures pursuant to hierarchical natural law. Since these hierarchies need not be institutional, but rather can be assumed by common objects of consciousness, or relations, or arrangements of given impulses. That's the end of the podcast for today.